Growing up in the middle of nowhere, USA, I attended public schools. Monday through Friday, I'd wake up early, jump on the bus, and go to a concrete building where I would begrudgingly sit for roughly 7 hours, rotating between classes by the ring of a bell. Then I'd go home and do it all over again the next day. Now, I'm not unique in this situation, as many others in the US today have and still do the same. But it wasn't lost on me the strangeness of it all. Often I would memorize facts and phrases retained only for a test, then quickly forgotten. Many times I would scramble to finish a project that I didn't really grasp the point of, or how it would benefit or affect me in my education. Even today, I barely remember any of the tools I was taught during my 12 years of the public school system. Many people, realizing this themselves, opt to homeschool their own children, while others resort to the very expensive option of private schooling. Yet most must rely on the bread and butter of public schools to nourish their children's minds for the simple reason of cost effectiveness. Some may even favor this option for the necessity of a child to understand and conquer the complicated dynamic that is the middle school hierarchy of coolness, otherwise known as civilized Lord of the Flies. However, many have no idea the shocking history of the public school system, its bizarre similarities to the factory school model, or its intended purpose that alludes to, as per usual, keeping people in line and propping up the 1%. It's really no secret at this point that the US has a very deep history of creating obedient little workers to fuel the current hierarchical system. Okay, but how did we get here? First, we have to go all the way back to the industrial era where it all began. There's a common idea that's been circulating for a few years that the American school system was based on the Prussian School model. This system emerged in the 18th and 19th centuries as a response to the needs of the state for an educated populace capable of serving in its military, bureaucracy, and growing economy. It eventually became one of the most influential models of education, which emphasized structure, standardization, and, of course, state control. And this is where we see the true underpinnings of the Prussian school model. They wanted disciplined, loyal, and obedient citizens. There was an emphasis on obedience to authority, patriotism, and uniformity, which reflected the hierarchical and militarized structure of Prussian society. Education was seen as a tool to instill values that supported the monarchy and the bureaucracy, cultivating allegiance to the state while maintaining social order. With the rise of industrialization, the demand for trained workers grew, which reflected in the curriculum. Lower-class students were taught basic skills, while higher-class students received a more academic education. Teachers were trained to enforce discipline, and the long school year mirrored the work demands of the time. Prior to industrialization, schooling was quite irregular, usually during the winter months when the children weren't needed for planting or harvesting. Learning a trade or skill through apprenticeships was also more common. This was a year-round commitment, but it was not school in the modern sense. When industrialization came onto the scene, this standardized the schooling system. Attendance became mandatory. Breaks for holidays were shorter, and the years became much longer. Although the Prussian system helped shape modern public education through standardized curricula and professional teacher training, it also reinforced social divisions. Higher education remained largely reserved for the elite, and the focus on conformity and state control sought to strengthen government power rather than encourage creativity or independent thinking.
And what did he do?
He misspelt the word anti-disestablishmentarianism.
How long will he be in the stocks?
3 days.
I see.
There were a few different levels of education in the Prussian system designed to cater to different segments of society and prepare the students for certain roles in life. The 3 tiers are as such. There was the Volksschule, which provided basic literacy and moral education for the working class with the aim of instilling obedience and productivity. This was roughly 70 to 80% of the population. The Realschule, which trained the middle class for technical and industrial professions, supporting economic growth. This was 15 to 20% of the population. The Gymnasium, which prepared future leaders and professionals with a very rigorous classical education, often leading to university and prestigious careers. This was roughly 5 to 10% of the population. Prussia was one of the first countries to implement tax-funded mandatory primary education. This model would go on to influence other countries and create what we know today as the common school model. Its influence on the United States, for example, should not be understated. In 1843, Horace Mann visited Germany to study its education system and to see how it worked. Seeing the way things operated, he became inspired by the Prussian approach and became convinced this was the answer to creating good, orderly citizens. After returning, he used his findings to advocate for the common school movement in Massachusetts, persuading lawmakers, especially in his Whig Party, to support tax-funded public education. New York trialed the system, and soon many northern states, inspired by Massachusetts, adopted similar reforms, and thus it spread. While a lot of people claim that the American school system was based on the factory model system, this isn't entirely correct and paints quite a broad stroke on the history of the education system. It's a bit of an oversimplification to suggest that the American school system was to create workers for factories, which may have been more of a side effect rather than the real intentional objective. The goal of those in power was not merely to produce factory workers, but to create model citizens. What they hoped to create was obedience, and the focus was not on the end result, but on the process of shaping it. The design of the common school system was intentionally structured to mold children into compliant individuals, ready to fulfill predetermined roles in society by the time they reached adulthood. Now, this may not have been the desired result when the model was introduced in the US, but the way in which this model functions generally creates this outcome. For example, a small business may seem chaotic and laid back, much more creative and free in its approach. This is where entrepreneurs thrive. But as a business becomes larger and more corporatized, it loses much of its creative spark and must focus on structure and predictability to keep the ball rolling and the profits increasing. There tends to be more red tape, more rules. This too is what happens with any institution, as it has happened with the schooling system. The aim may not have been to create factory workers, but the outcome is nearly the same. Education has become focused on rule following, lacking creativity, and driven by predictability. There is a removal of the unique contributions of the child and what they may want to learn in favor of creating a predictable outcome. The decision will now be made for them. It's a removal of their autonomy. Something most people can attest to when they themselves come out of school and start working their dream job, where they again are feeling those same feelings. A feeling of subservience. This can all be directly traced back to the industrial era when mass production and profit was and still is the goal. Once conformity sets in and the belief that this is the only path to success takes hold, it creates the illusion that predictable outcomes are the key to happiness. People are conditioned to follow orders and fit into predefined roles. It isn't really a surprise that many experience a roadblock or a quarter to midlife crisis early in life. It's at this point that they begin to question the programming and reconnect with their inner guidance, realizing the value of independent thought. And that leads me to my next point. It should come as no surprise that creativity scores have tanked in recent years. The Torrance test of creative thinking, developed in 1966 by E. Paul Torrance, is one of the most widely used measures for assessing creativity in children. This test evaluates things like fluency, originality, and elaboration. The scores from these tests have shown a huge decline in the past 3 decades, beginning in the 1990s. What are the reasons for this? A study published in the Creativity Research Journal in 2011 analyzed data from the Torrance tests of creative thinking and found a pretty big decrease in creative thinking scores among US children from the 1990s to the late 2000s. The research suggested that while IQ scores increased during this time, creative thinking scores decreased. This trend was observed across all age groups, with the younger children showing the sharpest decrease. Now, researchers believe the decline in creativity could be linked to a few different things. Increased academic pressure. This focus on standardized testing leads to a very narrow curriculum, which emphasizes grades and test scores over creative exploration. Have you noticed that the topics you enjoy, you'll go out of your way to learn out of curiosity and retain the information because it was important to you? Standardized testing creates a narrow focus where instead of teaching students valuable real-world skills, it ends up teaching them how to pass tests. It's like staying in the shallow end of the pool rather than providing a deeper and more impactful learning experience that actually engages the student. And less unstructured playtime and more screen time. The decrease in the amount of unstructured playtime children now have is quite significant. Kids just don't have nearly as much time anymore for playtime due to an increase in school assignments and time spent dedicated to school. According to a survey by the National Center for Education Statistics, children in grades K through 5 spend an average of 4.5 hours per week on homework. This increases as they progress through school. Middle schoolers average 6 hours and high schoolers average 8 to 10 hours. There's also been an increase in the amount of screen time, which, as we know, leads to passive consumption rather than active creation. According to a study in the Journal of Pediatrics, on average, children spend over 7 hours a day on screens. It should really come as no surprise that while creative expression is squashed, the creative muscle becomes atrophied. Why exercise something you don't use? When the food is brought to you, why would you feel the need to go out and hunt? If children are kept in school for 12 years, 5 days a week, 7 hours a day, with little opportunity to explore their own interests, dreams, and aspirations, how are they supposed to discover what they really want out of life when it comes to graduating? They barely have the time, especially with the constant academic pressure to memorize, test well, and pass classes. They're simply raised to desire these goals because it's all they've ever known. The truth of the matter is that school for the masses was never really intended to create free thinkers that would go on to change and shape society in a new and positive way. It was intended to create workers that will come to work at the appointed time, listen to their bosses, follow orders, and continue on for the rest of their lives.
There must be something wrong with the internal clock on our security system.
May have been a minute late.
Well, no, but according to this, you were 2 minutes late. So either you're a liar or this system is off by a full minute.
It's sad to see that many people living this way eventually reach a crossroads where they ask themselves, is this all there is? After following the very well-trodden path, getting the education, the job, the partner, the house, the kids, they start to question whether this predictable outcome they've worked toward is truly what they wanted, or if it was simply something that was fed to them. Industrialization did a lot. It boosted economic growth, created jobs, drove technological innovation, and promoted global trade by enabling mass production and the exchange of goods. However, at a certain point, too much of a good thing can go wrong. Very wrong. We've never seen the amount of pollution and overconsumption, trash in the ocean piling up in the world than ever before. We have too much stuff. And like the industrialization of goods, the industrialization of education, too, has resulted in a populace far more educated than ever before. This is a good thing. However, quality is always better than quantity. We may have a lot of people educated, but the quality is certainly lacking. We should treat children like people. They have their own opinions and thoughts and feelings just like adults do. Currently, we as grown adults are facing a time where we too are seeking more autonomy and freedom outside of the capitalistic structure fed to us. And to keep the hamster wheel going that we ourselves don't want would be cruel. There should be major transformations to the education system. It needs it. Prioritizing things like unstructured play, personalized learning, and a more flexible curriculum that encourages critical thinking could be helpful. Emphasizing project-based learning and reducing academic pressure would allow the students to explore their interests, experiment without fear of failure, and develop more innovative skills, moving away from the rigid Prussian model. Now, I know what you're thinking, this sounds a whole lot like that unschooling movement. There are a lot of issues with the unschooling movement. Honestly, too many to mention in one video, but I'll briefly touch on it. If you're not aware, the unschooling movement is a practice that's based on self-driven learning that's lesson-free and curriculum-free. Those behind the unschooling movement believe that the more personal and self-directed the learning, the more meaningful, better understood, and ultimately useful it becomes for the child. The problem with this is that it puts a whole lot of pressure on a child that, quite frankly, isn't really equipped or prepared yet to organize their schedule or needs properly. Unschooling can also place the blame on the child, which allows neglectful parents to flourish. As a person who was victim to this themselves says, if you're uneducated, it's your fault, since you, as an uneducated child, are in charge of your education. Some parents, mine included, use unschooling as a way to let their children run free and absolve themselves of any guilt for developmental delays, since the child is in charge. Oh, he can't read? That's okay, he'll learn it when he feels like it. Some people, even parents, aren't properly equipped to give their children an adequate education. However, there can be a middle ground. Children do need some structure. A certain level of routine and guidance has been shown to help children feel secure and understand expectations. However, again, overly rigid structures can stifle their ability to think creatively and solve problems on their own. Perhaps balancing the structure of a classroom setting, yet peppered with opportunities for free play, exploration, and critical thinking, can help to create more of that creative, independent thinking that has been declining in recent decades. Perhaps this could be the way to spark that inner freedom in a new generation that so desperately needs it. I guess we'll have to see.